Hello, today I would like to show you how I make my Shadowbox artworks. I had a few questions about my process, about how I sketch and how I paint, how I cut, how I decide on what goes onto each layer, and just how overall process looks like from start to finish. So I thought in this video I would walk you through all the steps that I personally take in my process, and maybe it will inspire you also to try this hobby. Making a sketch is always the very first step of any artwork making process in general, not only the Shadowbox. And here I'm making a very rough sketch with a goal to just have a general idea of what I want to make, what I want to paint, so that I have an approximate plan to work towards. I want to understand what I will be working on, like what will be my main scene, what will be my supporting elements, if maybe there are places I want to add a little bit more detail, a little bit less detail, kind of to have a good general idea of my picture. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be overly detailed, but I want to have a clear understanding of approximately how my final picture will look like. Now it's time to clean up our sketch. I use my light box to outline every line and every shape that, eventually, I will include in my Shadowbox. I think this step is more necessary for more complex or more detailed artworks, and if you're working on a little bit more simple Shadowbox, then I don't think this step is strictly necessary. I think you can use your initial sketch. It should be just fine. I keep my drawing here very minimal, just clean lines, no shadows, no textures. That's something that we're gonna add later on. This way, when I start planning my layers in my next step, for me it's very easy to decide and to understand what each layer will have, how detailed it has to be, and what exact elements have to be present there for my picture to look as my sketch. At this stage, I try to carefully think about what shapes I am using. So for instance, here you can see that I have very organic, very floaty shapes that I'm using for nature, like nothing is straight, everything is a little bit wavy. You can see it in elements like trees and hills. And at the same time, I'm using very geometric, very straight, strict lines for houses. And I really like that kind of contrast between nature and human-made elements. And I think that makes just the overall picture a little bit more interesting to look at. While doing this sketch, I realized that it's probably a little bit too small for such an amount of details. I think I went a little bit too overboard with how many trees and stars I'm adding, and I really like it, so I still want to make it, but I want to make it a little bit bigger. And so what I did, I took a photo of my sketch and I printed it, and when printing I zoomed it in a bit, so now it should fit A5, so it's double the size that I previously planned for. I think it will be a bit easier to work with details and a little bit easier to look at the process as a video. At this stage, I approximately highlight which parts will belong to each layer, and I number each layer correspondingly. And now we're gonna trace everything again. I promise you this is the last time we're gonna trace it. This is actually the final version that I will be painting and then eventually cutting and gluing everything together. At this point I had a few sketch iterations, I know exactly what I'm gonna do, so I am tracing every single layer one by one. Deciding on layers and what goes on each layer is probably one of the more important parts of building a Shadowbox. Here you decide which elements will be separate, which will be painted directly on the paper, and which you will cut and glue to the paper to create that 3D effect. And I think the choice really depends on how much depth you want to create and how much detail you want to add to your artwork. Here I'm trying to find a bit of a balance. I think I will paint a little bit more directly on the paper than I usually do, and the reason for that is that I want to add more layers than elements themselves. I think this is an artistic choice, and you can choose to go entirely different way. You can have less layers but more details, maybe more layers and more details. This is a wonderful moment and time to experiment and see what works best for you and your artistic style. After I traced all the layers, I put them next to each other to just check if maybe something needs a little bit more attention, if all the elements are there, or maybe I want to have another tree or a bit more details. But if everything looks good and everything is ready, then it's time to paint. Today I will be using gouache paints. I tried different mediums before, and I'm still experimenting to find the paint and the style, to be honest, that I prefer. I have a lot of experience with watercolors. This is a type of paint that I used very often before, and I really like it a lot. This Shadowbox, I would like it to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more pigmented, and I think gouache paints will fit it a little bit better. I think I will also add a little bit more details later on with colored pencils to give a bit more texture and just to make certain elements look a little bit sharper, but overall I think gouache will be my main paint of choice. Oh, and recently I also tried using acrylic markers, and I really like how that looks, so this is also your invitation to try different tools and materials and experiment and see what works better for you, because we all have different preferences and we all have different styles, and at the end, you know, this is a way to express yourself. So trying out different things and seeing what works best is the best way to find what you like. I work layer by layer, and every time it's ready I would cut it out and I would put it on the final version of my sketch that I made earlier, the one that I printed and where I numbered my layers. And I would usually just circle that number so that I know that that layer is ready and it's time to work on the next one. For cutting my paper, I use an x-acto knife. I think it gives a bit more precise lines compared to regular scissors. For my blades, I'm using blade number 11. I think that's the most default, the most standard blade you can find for paper craft knife. I'll make sure to link all the materials and tools I'm using in this video in the link in the video description. You might have noticed that I had an iPad here with a colored sketch. What I did is I took a picture of it and I colored it in Procreate app to kind of give myself a bit more guidance into which colors I want to use and how. This is by no means an obligatory step, but if you would like to do it but you don't have an iPad or don't have a Procreate app, you can always do it just on your sketch that you have made beforehand. You can just color directly on top of it, and that will give you a little bit of an idea of the color scheme you want to follow. I am very guilty of using every possible paint that I have in my palette, and I need to kind of teach myself to restrict the color selection that I'm using so that I have a little bit more consistent color scheme. And for me, having the selection of colors up front, that helps me to have my colors a little bit more under control. You might have noticed that while I'm painting, I'm not particularly careful into keeping paint within the lines that I've sketched. This is actually on purpose. First of all, it's easier to paint like this, but the most important reason is that it gives me a little bit more color to work with. So when I will be cutting things out with my craft knife and I want to slightly change the shape, say for example, I want to make my tree a little bit bigger or the point of the star a little bit longer, I actually have that extra colored paper to change the shape in the last moment. That also means that I actually have to be a little bit less precise while cutting, and so it's just easier on my hand and it's just generally easier and more enjoyable process. When all the elements are ready, everything is painted and all details are added, then it's time to glue everything together. In this Shadowbox, I'm using wood glue. In my more recent shadow boxes, I learned that I actually prefer double-sided tape, especially double-sided foam tape, because it gives me a little bit more of a 3D effect. I think this is more of a personal preference, what works best for you. I would suggest trying out both wood glue, as I'm using here, or simple stick glue, as well as double-sided tape and foam tape, just to see whatever works best for what you're trying to create. I like to glue every layer that I make to an inner frame, because then it makes sure that it's set in a certain location and it's not gonna move around. And then I put all the frames in the right sequence as I design them from background to foreground, and I put them in the shadow box. These are two lids where inner box is a little bit tighter fit and the outer box is a little bit bigger. They close on each other and that's about it. I was making them before from paper, and you can see here I also assemble it from the paper that I'm using for the inner frames, but I learned that having sturdier frames that I can assemble and deassemble multiple times is way easier for me. So together with my partner we designed plastic frames that we 3D printed home, and that's what I'm using in my more regular creative practice. As with all other tools and materials, I will add a link to the plastic frames in the video description. Either before or after putting all the frames, all the layers inside the Shadowbox, I think it's a good idea to add any final details. Quite often for me that's gonna be either some extra details with colored pencils or maybe even an extra layer if I want to add a bit more to the background or foreground, or maybe extra stars. So any final touches or details that will allow me to make this artwork just a little bit more interesting. Before we jump to the final assembly, I want to say that this particular design, as well as the Shadowbox, the paper Shadowbox that you see here, they are available as a PDF template that you can download and print on your home printer or maybe with cutting machine like a Cricut, and you can try it by yourself. I know this video mostly focuses on painting rather than assembly, so if that's something you would like to learn more about, please let me know. Or any other topics that you think would be interesting to cover related to papercraft as such, I would be really happy to hear it from you in the comments or any other way that you can reach me. I am very happy how this Shadowbox turned out. I think I learn a lot with every Shadowbox that I make. For me, that's a very interesting craft to explore, to try, because it is very close to traditional painting, and painting is a very big part of the process, but also you have that beautiful 3D effect, and you can play with layers, you can play with adding or removing elements, so there is, how I feel it, way more freedom in the creative process. At every step, you can decide to change something, to add something, extra layer, extra detail, remove a layer, change colors, and I enjoy it a lot because until you finish a Shadowbox you really don't know how it's gonna look, and it's very exciting. I'm already working on the next video where I show a little bit more in-depth approach and also show my mistakes and where I stumble over, and I think it's gonna be very interesting to watch for you to see what works and what does not work. So I guess I'll see you next time. Happy crafting! Bye!